The crack of gunfire shattered the evening calm, sending Florence Ainsley diving behind a stack of wooden crates in the alley behind Wallace's busiest saloon. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, stifling her panicked breaths. It was just past sunset on a warm July evening in 1878, and what she had witnessed moments ago was something no one was meant to see, especially not a 23-year-old schoolteacher who had simply taken a shortcut on her way home. Florence squeezed her eyes shut, but the image remained vivid. Mayor Jenkins on his knees, pleading for his life before Silas Thorne, leader of the notorious Red River Gang, put a bullet through his head. The mayor's body had crumpled like a discarded puppet, his blood spreading across the dirt. Thorne's cold eyes had scanned the area afterward, and that's when Florence had accidentally knocked over an empty bottle, revealing her presence. Now she was running for her life through the back streets of Wallace, Idaho, her navy blue skirt clutched in her fists as she fled barefoot, having abandoned her impractical boots to move faster. The shouts of men behind her grew closer. Find her. Nobody sees Thorne's business and lives to tell about it. Florence darted through another alley, her lungs burning. Wallace had been her home for only 8 months ever since she'd arrived to take up the teaching position at the town's newly built schoolhouse. She loved this mining town nestled in the mountains, loved her students and the community that had welcomed her. Now it was about to become her grave. As she rounded a corner, a strong arm suddenly wrapped around her waist, yanking her into the shadows. Before she could scream, a calloused hand clamped over her mouth. "Don't make a sound if you want to live," a deep voice whispered in her ear. Florence struggled against her captor, but his grip was unyielding. "I'm not with them," the voice continued urgently. "I'm trying to help you. Those men will kill you without hesitation." The footsteps of her pursuers grew louder, their angry voices filling the night air. Florence stopped struggling, her survival instinct telling her that whoever held her was her only hope. The men from the Red River Gang ran past their hiding spot, and she could see their silhouettes against the dim light from the main street. 4 men, all armed, all looking to silence her permanently. Only when their voices faded did the stranger release his hand from her mouth, though he kept his arm around her waist, holding her firmly in the shadows. "Who are you?" Florence whispered, turning her head to glimpse the face of her rescuer. Even in the dimness, she could make out his features, a strong jawline shadowed with stubble, intense eyes beneath the brim of a worn Stetson, and a face weathered by sun and wind. He appeared to be in his late 20s, and despite her fear, Florence couldn't help but notice how handsome he was. "Ethan Archer," he replied, his voice low. "U.S. Marshal, and I believe you just witnessed something that makes you the most important person in Idaho territory right now." Florence's breath caught in her throat. "They killed Mayor Jenkins. I saw everything." "The man who did it, they called him Thorne." Ethan nodded grimly. "Silas Thorne. I've been tracking him and his gang for months. The mayor must have refused to cooperate with whatever scheme they're running." He finally released her waist, but kept a protective stance, his body angled between her and the direction the gang had gone. "What's your name, Miss?" "Florence Ainsley. I'm the schoolteacher here." "Well, Miss Ainsley, I need to get you somewhere safe immediately. The Red River Gang doesn't leave witnesses, and they won't stop until you're dead or they are." His eyes met hers, conveying the gravity of the situation. "Do you understand what I'm saying? Your life as you knew it just ended, at least until Thorne is behind bars or in the ground." Florence felt her knees weaken as the reality of her situation sank in. "But my students, my home." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, genuine regret in his voice, "but right now we need to focus on keeping you alive." You're the only witness to a murder committed by one of the most wanted men in the West." A distant shout made them both tense. "They're doubling back," Ethan muttered. "We need to move. Is there anywhere close by we can go that they wouldn't think to look?" Florence thought quickly. Mrs. Whitaker's boarding house on Pine Street. She takes in laundry from the miners. There's a cellar where she stores supplies few people know about it. That'll do for tonight. Tomorrow at first light we leave Wallace. With Ethan's hand firmly gripping hers, they moved through the shadows, avoiding the main streets. Florence felt as though she was living someone else's nightmare. Just hours ago, she had been teaching arithmetic to the children of miners and shopkeepers. Now she was fleeing for her life with a marshal she'd just met. They reached the modest boarding house without incident. The back door was unlocked, as was common in Wallace, where neighbors still trusted one another despite the occasional rowdiness from the mining camps. Florence led Ethan through the kitchen to a small door partially hidden behind a stack of flour sacks. The cellar was cramped and smelled of soap and damp earth. A single lantern hung from a hook, which Ethan lit after securing the door behind them. The flickering light cast long shadows across the wooden shelves stocked with preserves and laundry supplies. "Mrs. Whitaker won't come down here until morning," Florence whispered, sinking onto a crate. Her bare feet were dirty and scratched, her dress torn at the hem from her flight. "What happens now, Marshal?" Ethan removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Now you tell me exactly what you saw, every detail, and then we figure out how to keep you alive long enough to testify against Thorne." Florence recounted everything: how she had been returning from visiting a sick student when she decided to cut through the alley behind the Silver Dollar Saloon. She described the confrontation between Thorne and Mayor Jenkins, the words exchanged about protection money and mining claims, and the cold-blooded execution that followed. "Jenkins was trying to stand up to them," Ethan explained as she finished her account. "Thorne and his gang have been moving from town to town across Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, setting up protection rackets, taking over mining claims by force. They've killed before, but we've never had a witness willing or able to testify." He knelt before her, his expression intensely serious. "You need to understand something, Miss Ainsley. What you saw makes you invaluable to justice and to me, but it also puts you in more danger than you can imagine. Thorne won't just come after you himself. He'll put a price on your head that will tempt every bounty hunter and desperado in the territory." Florence straightened her shoulders, summoning courage she didn't know she possessed. "What choice do I have? I cannot allow a murderer to walk free when I have the power to stop him." A hint of admiration flickered in Ethan's eyes. "That's brave talk, but brave talk won't stop bullets. I'm going to take you to Boise. The territorial court is in session there, and I have friends who can keep you safe until the trial." "Boise is more than 200 miles from here," Florence said, her eyes widening. "Through mountain passes and open country." "And every mile of it dangerous," Ethan agreed grimly. "But we don't have a choice. The local law here isn't equipped to handle Thorne's gang, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of them are already in his pocket." He moved to the small window near the ceiling, peering out into the darkness. "Try to get some rest. We leave before dawn, and we'll need to travel hard." Florence settled onto a pile of clean linens Mrs. Whitaker had stored in the corner, but sleep seemed impossible. Her mind raced with images of the mayor's murder and the daunting journey ahead. After what seemed like hours, she noticed Ethan sitting against the wall, his revolver resting on his knee, eyes alert despite the late hour. "Marshal," she whispered, "how did you come to be in Wallace tonight? It seems providential." Ethan's mouth curved into a slight smile. "Not Providence, Miss Ainsley. Information. I've been trailing Thorne for 3 months, ever since he and his men robbed a bank in Montana and killed 2 guards. My informant told me they were heading to Wallace to expand their business interests. I just arrived this afternoon. Then you couldn't have saved the mayor. No, he admitted, regret heavy in his voice. I was still getting my bearings in town, trying to confirm Thorne's presence without alerting him. I was actually in the saloon when I heard the shot, but by the time I got out back, all I saw was you running and Thorne's men in pursuit. Florence wrapped her arms around herself. I keep thinking about Mayor Jenkins' wife and their children. Who will tell them what happened? The sheriff will handle that, Ethan said. Though I doubt he'll mention Thorne by name. Too many people are afraid of him. But not you, Florence observed. Something dark passed across Ethan's face. Thorne killed my partner 6 months ago in Wyoming. Shot him in the back during a raid on their camp. So no, I'm not afraid of him. I'm determined to see him hang. The personal vendetta in his voice should have alarmed Florence, but instead she found it reassuring. This wasn't just a job for Marshal Archer, it was a mission. And now, unwittingly, it had become hers too. As promised, Ethan woke her before dawn. Mrs. Whitaker had not yet risen, and they slipped out of the cellar and through the back door without being detected. The streets of Wallace were quiet, with only a few miners heading to their early shifts and the occasional saloon patron stumbling home after a night of revelry. Ethan led her to the livery stable, where he had stabled his horse the previous day. The stable boy was asleep in the hayloft, and Ethan moved silently, preparing his sturdy bay gelding for the journey. "We need a horse for you," he whispered, eyeing the other animals in their stalls. "I can't steal someone's horse," Florence protested. "Would you rather face Thorne on foot?" When she didn't respond, Ethan continued, "I'll leave payment, and I'll send word to the marshal's office in Boise to compensate the owner properly." He selected a gentle-looking mare with good lines, quickly saddling her while Florence stood watch at the door. Outside, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the mountains in soft pink hues. "I need to stop by my boarding house," Florence said. "I have nothing with me, no clothes, no money." Ethan hesitated. "It's risky. Thorne's men will be watching your place." "It's just around the corner. I can slip in through the back. Please, I can't travel across Idaho territory in just this torn dress and no shoes." After a moment's consideration, Ethan nodded. 5 minutes. Grab only what you absolutely need. I'll wait with the horses in the alley behind your place." They led the horses quietly through the back streets. Florence directed Ethan to the modest boarding house where she rented a room, and true to his word, he remained in the shadows of the alley with both animals while she crept inside. Her room was just as she had left it the day before, neat and tidy, with a small desk covered in students' essays waiting to be graded. The normalcy of it made her heart ache. She moved quickly, changing into her most practical dress and sturdy boots, then stuffed a carpetbag with essentials. A change of clothes, her hairbrush, a small amount of money she kept hidden in a book, and a photograph of her parents back in Boston. As an afterthought, she grabbed the small Derringer pistol her father had insisted she take west with her. She had never fired it, but the weight of it in her pocket offered a small comfort as she made her way back down the stairs and out the rear entrance. Ethan was waiting, vigilant as ever. "Any sign of trouble?" she asked as he helped her mount the mare. "Not yet, but they're out there," he replied, swinging into his own saddle. "Thorne's not a man who gives up easily, especially when his freedom's at stake." They rode out of Wallace as the town was just beginning to stir, taking a seldom-used trail that wound into the hills rather than the main road. Ethan set a brisk pace, frequently glancing behind them and studying the terrain ahead with a practiced eye. By mid-morning, They had put several miles between themselves and Wallace, following a route that kept them off the main trails but still heading generally southwest toward Boise. The July sun beat down relentlessly, and Florence, though an adequate rider, was already feeling the strain of sustained travel on horseback. "How long will the journey take?" she asked during a brief stop to rest the horses near a small stream. Ethan filled their canteens before answering. 6 days, maybe 7, depending on our pace and whether we encounter any complications. Complications meaning Thorne's men finding us. Among other things, he agreed, his expression grim. These mountains are full of dangers besides outlaws, bears, mountain lions, unpredictable weather. And we'll need to cross the Salmon River. It's running high this time of year. Florence splashed cold water on her face, trying to hide her apprehension. She had come west seeking adventure and independence, tired of the rigid constraints of Boston society. Her parents had been scandalized when she accepted the teaching position in Idaho Territory, warning her of the untamed wilderness and rough men she would encounter. Now she wished she had heeded at least some of their caution. "We should keep moving," Ethan said, helping her back onto her horse. "I know a place about 10 miles from here where we can spend the night. An old trapper's cabin abandoned now, but it offers better shelter than sleeping under the stars." As they continued their journey, Florence found herself studying her companion. Ethan Archer rode with the easy confidence of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. His lean frame was corded with muscle, his movements economical and precise. Though he rarely smiled when he did, it transformed his solemn face, making him appear younger and revealing a dimple in his left cheek. "How long have you been a marshal?" she asked as they navigated a particularly steep section of trail. 5 years, he replied. "Before that, I rode with the cavalry during the war, then did some scouting for the army out west. You've seen a lot of this country then." "More than most," he glanced at her. "What about you? You don't strike me as someone born and raised in a mining town." Florence laughed softly. "Is it that obvious? I was born in Boston. My father is a banker, and my mother's family owns textile mills in Massachusetts. They expected me to marry well and host dinner parties for the rest of my life. And instead you chose to teach in a frontier town hundreds of miles from civilization." "I wanted to make a difference," she said simply. "In Boston, I was just another society girl with a proper education and proper manners. Here I can help children learn, help shape the future of a growing community." Ethan was silent for a moment. "That's admirable," he finally said. "Most people who come west are running from something or seeking their fortune. Few come to build something lasting." They lapsed into companionable silence as the day wore on. By late afternoon, clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising rain by evening. Ethan pushed their pace, eager to reach the cabin before the weather turned. The abandoned trapper's cabin was little more than a one-room shack with a sagging roof and gaps in the log walls, but it was dry and defensible, the two qualities Ethan valued most. After seeing to the horses, he reinforced the door while Florence gathered wood for a small fire. "We can't risk much smoke," he explained as he carefully fed small branches into the crude stone fireplace. "Might as well hang a sign saying we're here." Florence nodded, unpacking the meager provisions they had brought: jerky, hardtack, and coffee. As they sat by the fire eating their simple meal, the promised rain began to fall, drumming on the cabin's roof and hissing as it met the earth outside. "Tell me about Thorne," Florence said, wrapping her hands around a tin cup of coffee to warm them. "What kind of man is he, beyond a murderer?" Ethan's expression hardened. "The worst kind. He presents himself as a businessman, well-spoken, well-dressed, charming even." makes it easy for him to move in respectable circles, gain trust. But underneath, he's ruthless. Started as a horse thief in Texas, graduated to armed robbery, then realized there was more money and less risk in extortion and protection rackets. And the men who follow him, mostly hardened criminals. His second-in-command, Frank Dawson, is almost as dangerous as Thorne himself. Served time in Yuma for killing 3 men in a card game. The others are similar killers, thieves, men with nothing to lose and no moral compass to guide them. Florence shivered, though the cabin was warming up, and I'm the only thing standing between them and freedom. You're the key to justice, Ethan corrected her. Without your testimony, Thorne will keep killing, keep taking whatever he wants. The intensity in his voice made Florence study him more closely. This is more than just your job, isn't it? You mentioned your partner, but I sense there's more to it. Ethan stared into the fire for a long moment before speaking. Thorne doesn't just hurt those who stand against him directly. He hurts anyone connected to them, makes examples of them. His jaw tightened. After he killed my partner, he went after his family. His wife and young son were staying in a small town in Wyoming. Thorne's men burned their house to the ground while they were sleeping. Florence gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's monstrous. That's who we're dealing with, Ethan said grimly. That's why I won't rest until he's brought to justice, and why I won't let him get to you. The personal nature of his vendetta suddenly made Florence realize the danger Ethan was putting himself in to protect her. I'm sorry about your partner and his family, she said softly. And I'm grateful for your help, though I never wanted to put anyone else at risk. Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding of the stakes and a mutual recognition of the other's courage. The moment was broken by a sound outside a branch snapping underfoot. Instantly, Ethan was on his feet, his revolver drawn. He extinguished the fire with a few kicks of dirt and moved silently to the window, peering out into the rainy darkness. Florence held her breath, her heart pounding as Ethan signaled for her to remain still. The seconds stretched into minutes as they waited, the only sounds the patter of rain on the roof and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. Finally, Ethan relaxed slightly. Probably just an animal, he whispered, though he didn't holster his weapon. But we should take turns keeping watch tonight. I can take the first shift, Florence volunteered, surprising herself with her own steadiness. Ethan looked skeptical. Have you ever used that derringer you're carrying? Florence flushed, caught off guard by his observation. How did you? The way you keep checking your pocket, he explained with a hint of a smile. And it makes a distinctive shape against your dress. My father insisted I take it when I came west, she admitted. I've never fired it, but I know how it works. Ethan considered this. All right. You take first watch. Wake me in 3 hours or immediately if you hear or see anything suspicious. And remember that derringer only has 2 shots, so make them count if it comes to that. He settled onto a bedroll near the door, his revolver within easy reach. Despite his apparent relaxation, Florence could tell he remained alert, ready to spring into action at the slightest provocation. She sat by the window, watching the rain create silver patterns in the darkness. Her life had changed irrevocably in the span of a day, and she found herself tied to this solemn, determined man by circumstances neither of them had chosen. Yet already she felt a connection to him, a trust that went beyond their forced companionship. As the hours passed and the rain eventually subsided, Florence remained vigilant, but her mind drifted to what lay ahead. If they made it to Boys, if she testified, if Thorne was convicted, what then? Could she return to Wallace and resume her life as a schoolteacher? Or would she forever be looking over her shoulder, waiting for Thorne's allies to seek revenge? Eventually, She woke Ethan for his watch, though she found it difficult to sleep with so many troubling thoughts. She dozed fitfully until dawn when Ethan gently shook her shoulder. "Time to move," he said, already packed and ready. "I want to cover as much ground as possible before Thorne's men pick up our trail." They set out as the first light of day filtered through the trees, the world around them washed clean by the night's rain. The forest was alive with morning sounds, birds calling, small animals rustling in the underbrush, the distant gurgle of a stream swollen with rainwater. Their second day of travel took them deeper into the mountains, following game trails and old Indian paths that Ethan seemed to know by instinct. They spoke little, both aware that sound carried far in the wilderness, but the silence between them was comfortable rather than strained. By midday, they had reached a high ridge that offered a panoramic view of the land they had traversed. In the far distance, the smoke from Wallace's smelters was just visible against the horizon. Ethan surveyed the terrain with his spyglass, methodically scanning for any sign of pursuit. "See anything?" Florence asked, stretching in her saddle to ease her sore muscles. Ethan lowered the glass, his expression troubled. "Dust trail about 5 miles back, moving fast. Could be Thorne's men, could be just travelers." "What do we do?" "Change our route, move faster, and hope for the best," he replied, urging his horse forward. "There's a mining camp about 15 miles ahead, Silver Creek. Not much more than a collection of tents and a few cabins, but there might be other travelers there, maybe even a telegraph. We can send word to boys that we're coming." The pace Ethan set was punishing, and Florence bit back her complaints as they navigated treacherous mountain passes and forded swift running streams. By late afternoon, her thighs were chafed raw from the saddle, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, but she pressed on, drawing on reserves of determination she hadn't known she possessed. The mining camp of Silver Creek appeared just as the sun was beginning to set a haphazard arrangement of tents, crude cabins, and canvas-covered wagons clustered around a central fire pit. Men in dirt-stained clothes looked up from their evening meal as Ethan and Florence rode in, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open suspicion. "Easy," Ethan murmured to Florence. "Let me do the talking. These aren't the friendliest folk, but they're not likely to be in Thorne's pocket either." He dismounted and approached what appeared to be the camp's leader, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard who sat on an upturned barrel, cleaning a shotgun. "Evening," Ethan said, touching the brim of his hat. "My wife and I are heading to Boys. Was hoping we might rest here for the night, maybe get some hot food." Florence nearly started at being called his wife, but quickly composed herself, offering a tired smile to reinforce the story. The bearded man eyed them suspiciously. "Mighty strange route to Boys, coming this way. Heard there was trouble on the main road," Ethan replied smoothly. "Decided to take the long way around." After a tense moment, the man nodded. "You can stay. $5 for the both of you, includes food and a spot by the fire. No trouble, no questions. That's how we operate here." "Fair enough," Ethan agreed, handing over the money. "One more thing, your camp have a telegraph," the man snorted. "Telegraph? We're lucky to have coffee that ain't half dirt. Nearest telegraph is back in Wallace or downriver at Fort Ellis." Ethan concealed his disappointment. "Worth asking. Much obliged for the hospitality." They tended to their horses, then joined the miners around the large fire, accepting bowls of surprisingly hearty stew and mugs of strong coffee. Florence was acutely aware of the men's curious glances. A well-dressed woman was clearly an unusual sight in the remote camp, but none approached or questioned them directly, respecting the no-questions policy their leader had mentioned. As they ate, Ethan kept his voice low. We'll leave before first light. Those riders I spotted are probably still on our trail, and I don't want to bring trouble to these men." Florence nodded, grateful for the hot meal and the brief respite from their grueling journey. "Do you think Thorne himself is with them?" "Doubtful. He'll have sent his best trackers, but he's too cautious to dirty his own hands if he can help it." Ethan's expression was grim. "Not that it makes much difference. His men are just as deadly, and they know what happens if they fail him." After they had eaten, Ethan spread their bedrolls near the fire but positioned himself between Florence and the rest of the camp. She lay down gratefully, her body aching from the day's hard riding, but sleep remained elusive as her mind replayed the events that had brought her here. She was drifting into an uneasy slumber when Ethan suddenly tensed beside her, his hand moving to his revolver. A commotion had erupted at the edge of camp, shouting men and the sound of approaching horses. "Stay here," Ethan ordered, rising smoothly to his feet and moving toward the disturbance. Florence ignored the command, following a few paces behind. She could see 3 riders at the camp's perimeter, arguing with the bearded leader. Even in the firelight, she recognized the man in the center, Frank Dawson, Thorne's second in command, whom she had glimpsed during the mayor's murder. "Just passing through," Dawson was saying, his voice carrying across the camp. "Looking for a man and a woman traveling together. The woman's a witness in a legal matter, the man's interfering in private business." The camp leader stood his ground. "Like I told you, mister, we don't ask questions here, and we don't answer them either. You're welcome to rest your horses and move on, but that's all the hospitality you'll find." Florence shrank back into the shadows as Dawson's gaze swept the camp. Ethan had melted into the darkness, positioning himself at an angle to the newcomers, his hand on his weapon but not drawing attention to himself. For a tense moment, it seemed Dawson might force the issue. Then, with a curse, he reined his horse around. "We'll be moving on. But I'll say this once: anyone helping these people we're looking for is making an enemy of Silas Thorne. That's not something a wise man does." The threat hung in the air as Dawson and his companions rode off into the darkness. The camp was silent for a long moment before conversation slowly resumed, though now tinged with unease. Ethan appeared at Florence's side, taking her elbow and guiding her back to their spot by the fire. "They're closer than I thought," he muttered. "We need to leave now, under cover of darkness." "But the horses need rest," Florence protested. "They'll rest when we're dead if we stay," Ethan countered grimly. "Dawson's not giving up. He'll probably circle back once he thinks everyone's asleep." They packed quickly and quietly, thanking the camp leader who merely nodded, clearly relieved to see them go. Within minutes, they were riding away from the relative safety of Silver Creek, heading deeper into the wilderness. The night was clear, with a 3/4 moon providing enough light to navigate by. Ethan led them on a circuitous route, crossing and recrossing streams to confuse their trail, sometimes doubling back before changing direction. Despite his best efforts, Florence could sense his growing concern. "They're too close on our heels," he finally admitted as they paused to let the horses drink from a small creek. "Dawson's a good tracker, and he knows these mountains almost as well as I do." "What do we do?" Florence asked, fighting to keep the fear from her voice. Ethan studied the terrain ahead. "There's an old Nez Perce trail that cuts through these mountains. It's dangerous, narrow paths along cliff faces, treacherous even in daylight, but if we can reach it by morning, we might be able to gain some distance." They pushed on through the night, Florence struggling to stay awake in the saddle as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. Just as the eastern sky began to lighten, they reached the trail Ethan had mentioned, a narrow path carved into the side of a steep mountain, with a sheer drop of several hundred feet to the river below. "Stay close to the wall," Ethan instructed as they dismounted to lead the horses. One step at a time. Don't look down. Florence swallowed hard, gripping her mare's reins tightly as they began to edge along the perilous trail. The path was barely 3 feet wide in places, the rock face on one side and emptiness on the other. Every loose stone that skittered over the edge sent her heart racing, but she forced herself to keep moving, one careful step after another. They had traversed perhaps half a mile of the treacherous path when a gunshot echoed through the canyon, the bullet striking the rock wall inches from Ethan's head. They flattened themselves against the cliff face as another shot rang out. "They've found us." Florence gasped, panic threatening to overwhelm her as she spotted riders on the ridge above them. Ethan's face was a mask of determination. "Keep moving," he urged. "They have the high ground, but their shooting angle is poor. We need to reach that outcropping ahead. It offers some cover." More shots peppered the cliff around them as they hurried forward, the horses nickering in fear. Florence could hear Dawson shouting orders to his men, their voices carrying across the canyon. "Spread out. Don't let them reach the other side." The outcropping Ethan had indicated was tantalizingly close, a large rock formation that jutted from the cliff face, providing a natural shelter from the gunfire above. Just as they were about to reach it, Florence's mare reared in panic as a bullet struck too close, nearly sending Florence over the edge. She clung desperately to the reins, her feet slipping on the loose gravel. Ethan lunged for her, grabbing her arm and pulling her to safety, but in the process, her mare lost its footing. With a terrified whinny, the horse plunged over the edge, disappearing into the mist-shrouded depths below. "Keep moving," Ethan shouted, pushing Florence ahead of him toward the outcropping. They made it to the relative safety of the rock formation, huddling behind it as bullets continued to strike around them. Ethan returned fire sparingly, making each shot count, aware that their ammunition was limited. "We're pinned down," he said grimly. "They can wait us out up there or send men around to cut us off." Florence was trembling, but her voice was steady. "What can we do?" Ethan assessed their situation with a critical eye. "The trail widens about 200 yards ahead. If we can reach it, we might be able to make a stand or find a way down to the river. But we only have one horse now," Florence pointed out. "We'll have to leave him," Ethan decided. "The trail's too narrow for us to ride anyway, and he's more likely to panic and take us both over the edge." After securing their most essential supplies in a small pack, Ethan slapped his loyal gelding on the rump, sending it trotting back the way they had come. The distraction worked momentarily, drawing fire from above as Dawson's men mistook the horse for their targets. "Now." Ethan grabbed Florence's hand, and they sprinted along the narrow trail, keeping low and using what cover they could find. The shooting resumed almost immediately, but they were moving targets now, harder to hit as they zigzagged toward the wider section of trail ahead. They had almost reached it when a bullet grazed Ethan's left arm, tearing through his sleeve and drawing blood. He stumbled but kept moving, pulling Florence with him until they reached a cluster of boulders that provided better shelter. "You're hit," Florence gasped, seeing the spreading stain on his shirt. "Just a graze," Ethan assured her, though his face had paled slightly. "But we're still in a tight spot." He peered around the boulder, assessing their options. The trail did indeed widen here, leading to a forested area perhaps a quarter-mile ahead. If they could reach those trees, they would have a fighting chance. "They're repositioning," Ethan observed, watching the movement on the ridge above. "They'll try to flank us. We need to move fast." Florence tore a strip from her petticoat, quickly binding Ethan's wounded arm. Her touch was gentle but sure, and Ethan found himself impressed by her composure under fire. "Ready?" he asked when she had finished. Florence nodded, her face set in determination despite the fear in her eyes. They gathered their remaining supplies and prepared to make a dash for the forest. The crack of gunfire from an unexpected direction made them freeze. Someone was shooting not at them, but at Dawson's men on the ridge. Shouts of confusion and pain echoed across the canyon as the new attackers, hidden in the trees ahead, laid down a withering barrage of covering fire. "Federal marshals," a voice bellowed from the forest, "throw down your weapons." Dawson's response was a volley of bullets, but his position was exposed, and the marshal's fire was more accurate. Within minutes, 2 of his men had fallen, and Dawson himself was retreating, calling for the others to fall back. Ethan waited until the shooting had subsided before cautiously standing, keeping Florence behind him. "Marshal Archer," he called. "U.S. Marshal with a witness." A figure emerged from the trees, rifle at the ready but not aimed directly at them. "Archer, that really you?" Ethan relaxed slightly, recognizing the voice. "Cooper, how in blazes did you find us?" The other marshal approached, followed by 3 more lawmen. "Got word from Wallace about the mayor's murder. When we heard Thorne was involved and there was a witness, we figured you'd be heading for Boys with her. Decided to intercept rather than wait." Relief washed over Florence as the reality of their rescue sank in. They weren't alone anymore. Thorne's men had been driven off, at least temporarily, and now they had an armed escort to Boys. Cooper eyed Florence with curiosity. "This the witness, Florence Ainsley," Ethan confirmed. "She saw Thorne murder Mayor Jenkins clear as day. She's the key to putting him away for good." "Madam," Cooper tipped his hat respectfully, "you've shown remarkable courage. We'll get you safely to Boys." With the added protection of Cooper and his men, they made their way down from the treacherous mountain trail to a small clearing where the marshals had left their horses. There was a spare mount for Florence, and after treating Ethan's wound properly, they set off toward Boys at a steady pace. The journey was still arduous, but with 6 armed marshals surrounding her, Florence finally felt the constant fear begin to ebb. Each night, they camped in defensible positions, posting guards in rotation. During the days, she found herself riding alongside Ethan, their conversations growing more personal as the shared danger forged a bond between them. "What will you do after the trial?" she asked on the 5th day of their journey as they rode through a peaceful valley lush with summer wildflowers. Ethan considered the question. "Continue my work, I suppose. There's never a shortage of men like Thorne who need bringing to justice." "And will that work ever bring you back to Wallace?" Florence tried to keep her tone casual, but there was an undercurrent that made Ethan study her face closely. "It might," he said carefully. "Though I imagine you'll be heading back east once this is over, back to civilization and proper society." Florence shook her head. "No, Wallace is my home now, or it was. I'm not sure if I can go back even after Thorne is dealt with. His influence might linger." "You could teach elsewhere in the territory," Ethan suggested. "Boys is growing fast, always in need of good teachers." The thought of never returning to the small mining town that had welcomed her so warmly brought a pang of sadness to Florence's heart. Yet the prospect of remaining in Idaho, of perhaps seeing Ethan again, offered a surprising comfort. "I'll consider it," she said softly. They reached Boys on the afternoon of the 7th day, the territorial capital a welcome sight after their harrowing journey. The courthouse dominated the main street, a solid stone building that represented the law and order slowly taking root in the wild territory. Florence was installed in a comfortable room above the marshal's office, with a female deputy assigned to stay with her for protection. The territorial prosecutor visited that evening, taking her statement and preparing her for what to expect at the trial, which was scheduled to begin in 3 days. Thorne's been formally charged with the murder of Mayor Jenkins, the prosecutor explained. We've had our eye on him for some time, but without eyewitness testimony, we could never make anything stick. You've given us the opportunity to finally bring him to justice. Florence nodded, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. And has he been captured? The prosecutor exchanged glances with Ethan, who had insisted on being present. Not yet, but we've got men combing the territory for him. His gang's been scattered. Your encounter on the mountain trail dealt them a significant blow. After the prosecutor left, Ethan lingered, clearly concerned. You should get some rest, he said. The next few days will be difficult. Florence reached for his hand, surprising both of them with the gesture. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. I wouldn't be alive without you. His fingers closed around hers, warm and reassuring. You're braver than you know, Florence Ainsley. Most women would have collapsed under half the strain you've endured. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of feelings that had grown during their desperate journey. Then, Ethan gently released her hand. I'll be close by if you need anything, he promised, before leaving her to rest. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Florence's testimony was rehearsed and refined. Her appearance adjusted to make the best impression on the jury, respectable citizens of Boise, who would be deciding Thorne's fate in absentia until he was captured. On the morning of the trial, Florence dressed with care in a borrowed blue dress that the prosecutor's wife had altered to fit her. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned up her hair, aware of the importance of the day ahead. A knock at her door revealed Ethan, dressed more formally than she had ever seen him, in a clean shirt and dark vest, his marshal's badge prominently displayed. Ready? He asked. Florence took a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. The courtroom was packed when they arrived, citizens of Boise eager to witness the trial of the infamous Silas Thorne, even in his absence. Florence felt the weight of their stares as she was escorted to a seat near the front, Ethan remaining close at her side. The proceedings began with the prosecutor outlining the case against Thorne, not just the murder of Mayor Jenkins, but a litany of crimes across 3 territories. When Florence was called to testify, she rose on unsteady legs, but her voice was clear and unwavering as she recounted what she had witnessed in the alley behind the Silver Dollar Saloon. The cross-examination by Thorne's court-appointed lawyer was aggressive, attempting to undermine her credibility, but Florence held firm. She described the murder in precise detail, her teacher's memory for particulars serving her well, as she recalled exact words and actions. By the time she stepped down from the witness stand, there was a murmur of approval throughout the courtroom. Even Thorne's defender seemed resigned to the inevitable verdict. The jury retired to deliberate but returned within the hour. Their verdict was unanimous. Silas Thorne was guilty of first-degree murder. The judge issued an order for his immediate arrest and sentencing upon capture, with the penalty to be hanging. As they left the courthouse, Florence felt a curious mixture of relief and apprehension. Justice had been served, but Thorne remained at large, perhaps more dangerous than ever now that he had been convicted. What happens now? She asked Ethan as they walked back to the marshal's office. Now we wait, he replied. Every lawman in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming will be looking for Thorne. It's only a matter of time before he's caught. And until then, Ethan's expression was serious. Until then, you remain under protection. It's not safe for you to return to Wallace or to be on your own anywhere in the territory. The prospect of living in hiding, always looking over her shoulder, made Florence's heart sink. She had come west seeking independence, not confinement. "There must be another way," she said. Before Ethan could respond, a commotion erupted down the street. A rider was approaching at a gallop, his horse lathered with sweat. He reined in sharply in front of the marshal's office, jumping down from his mount. "Marshal Archer," the man called, spotting Ethan. "Urgent news from the north." Ethan strode forward, Florence at his side. "What is it, Spencer?" "Thorne's been cornered at an abandoned mine about 30 miles north of here," Spencer reported breathlessly. "Marshal Cooper and his men have him surrounded, but he's holed up inside with supplies and ammunition. Says he won't be taken alive." A tense expression crossed Ethan's face. "How many men with Cooper?" "5, sir. Not enough to rush the mine without casualties." Ethan turned to Florence, conflict evident in his eyes. "I need to go. Cooper was my partner's friend, too. He'll want to end this as much as I do, and that could make him reckless." Florence understood the unspoken message. Ethan feared Cooper might get himself or his men killed in an attempt to avenge his fallen comrade. "Of course you must go," she said firmly. "But I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not," Ethan protested. "It's too dangerous." "I'll stay back from the actual confrontation," Florence promised. "But I need to see this through to the end, need to see Thorne brought to justice with my own eyes." Their gazes locked in silent argument until Ethan finally relented. "You'll stay with the horses, well away from the mine, and you'll be under guard at all times." Within an hour, they were riding north with Spencer and 2 additional marshals. The pace was punishing, but Florence matched it without complaint, driven by the need to see Thorne face his reckoning. They reached Cooper's position shortly after nightfall, finding the marshals camped in a sheltered hollow about half a mile from the abandoned mine. The entrance was visible from their vantage point, a dark opening in the hillside with a dilapidated wooden structure surrounding it. Cooper greeted them with evident relief. "Glad you made it, Archer. The bastard's still in there. We've exchanged shots a few times, but he's well protected. Has enough food and water to last at least a week by my reckoning." "Any chance of smoking him out?" Ethan asked, studying the mine layout. Cooper shook his head. "Too many ventilation shafts. We'd need to block them all, and we can't get close enough without getting shot." Florence listened as the marshals discussed various strategies, all of which carried significant risk. Finally, Ethan turned to her. "Get some rest," he advised. "This might take time to resolve," but resolution came more swiftly than anyone anticipated. Shortly after midnight, as Florence was dozing near the campfire, a figure emerged from the darkness beyond their perimeter. One of the guards challenged the intruder, raising his rifle. "Don't shoot," a woman's voice called. "I have information about Thorne." The camp was instantly alert. The woman was brought into the firelight, young, disheveled, with fear and exhaustion etched on her face. Florence recognized her as one of the saloon girls from Wallace. "My name's Ruby," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been traveling with Thorne since Wallace. He forced me to come along when he fled." Cooper regarded her suspiciously. "Why come to us now?" "Because he's planning something terrible," Ruby replied. "He knows you have him trapped. He's going to wait until dawn, then try to shoot his way out. Said he'd rather die fighting than hang." She swallowed hard. "But first he plans to send men after her." She pointed at Florence. "He's obsessed with the idea of killing the witness before he goes down." Ethan's expression hardened. "How many men with him in the mine?" "Just 3 now," Ruby said. "The others scattered after that fight on the mountain trail. But he sent 2 men out the back way earlier tonight. They're circling around to attack your camp while Thorne creates a diversion." The information changed everything. Cooper immediately dispatched men to search the surrounding area for Thorne's accomplices, while Ethan moved Florence to a more defensible position away from the main camp. "If what she says is true, We can't wait until dawn, Ethan told Cooper. We need to act now while we have the advantage of surprise. Cooper nodded grimly. What's your plan, Ruby? Ethan turned to the saloon girl. Is there another entrance to the mine, a way we could approach without being seen? Ruby hesitated, then nodded. There's a ventilation shaft that leads down into the main tunnel. It's narrow, but a man could fit through it. Thorne doesn't know I know about it. I overheard two of his men talking. The plan came together quickly. Ethan and Cooper would enter through the ventilation shaft, while the other marshals maintained their positions at the main entrance, ready to prevent any escape attempt. Before leaving, Ethan sought out Florence one last time. She was waiting anxiously with one of the younger marshals who had been assigned to guard her. Be careful, she implored, taking his hands in hers. Thorne's desperate, and desperate men are unpredictable. I've come too far to fail now, Ethan assured her. When this is over, you'll be truly free to make your own choices again. Florence couldn't resist reaching up to touch his cheek. I already know what choice I want to make. Their eyes met in perfect understanding, and for a brief moment, Ethan allowed himself to imagine a future beyond this night, a future with Florence at his side. Then he gently disengaged, duty calling him back to the dangerous task at hand. The ventilation shaft was exactly as Ruby had described, narrow, dusty, and descending steeply into darkness. Ethan went first, moving silently despite the confined space, with Cooper following close behind. The shaft eventually opened into a side tunnel, dimly lit by a lantern hanging from a support beam. They could hear voices now, Thorne and his remaining men arguing about their dwindling options. Ethan signaled to Cooper, and they advanced cautiously, revolvers drawn. The confrontation, when it came, was swift and violent. Thorne's men were caught completely by surprise as Ethan and Cooper burst into the main chamber of the mine. One surrendered immediately, the other went for his gun and died for his trouble. Thorne himself was more prepared. He dove behind a stack of crates, firing wildly as he sought cover. A bullet grazed Cooper's shoulder, but the marshal maintained his position, returning fire with measured precision. It's over, Thorne, Ethan called. Throw down your weapon. Thorne's response was a string of profanities and another shot that splintered the wooden support beam near Ethan's head. I won't hang, Archer, Thorne shouted. You'll have to kill me. That can be arranged, Ethan replied coldly, moving to flank Thorne's position. The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with Thorne pinned down but refusing to surrender. Then, in a desperate gambit, he made a break for a side tunnel, firing as he ran. Ethan's shot caught him in the leg, sending him sprawling to the ground. The gun flew from Thorne's hand, skittering across the rocky floor out of reach. Don't move, Ethan ordered, approaching cautiously, his revolver trained on Thorne's prone form. For the first time, he got a clear look at the man he had been hunting for so long, well-dressed even now, his face handsome in a cold way, with eyes that held no remorse, only calculation and rage. You think this is justice, Marshal? Thorne spat, clutching his bleeding leg. Taking me back to hang based on the word of some schoolteacher. The jury already found you guilty, Ethan informed him, a grim satisfaction in his voice. The hanging's just a formality. Cooper approached, binding Thorne's wound before securing his hands behind his back. Silas Thorne, you're under arrest for the murder of Mayor Jenkins of Wallace, among numerous other charges. You'll be returned to Boys to face sentencing. As they hauled Thorne to his feet, Ethan couldn't resist adding, that schoolteacher showed more courage than you ever will, Thorne. Remember that when they put the noose around your neck. The men Thorne had sent to ambush the camp had been captured without incident, caught unawares by the marshals who had been alerted to their presence. By dawn, all of Thorne's remaining gang members were in custody, and Thorne himself was securely bound, his wounded leg treated sufficiently to allow travel. Florence was waiting anxiously when Ethan emerged from the mine. The sight of him dusty, a cut on his forehead, but otherwise unharmed, brought tears of relief to her eyes. Behind him came Cooper, and between them, the shuffling figure of Silas Thorne. It was strange to finally see the man who had upended her life, who had killed without remorse and ordered her death without hesitation. He was smaller than she had imagined, diminished by his capture and the knowledge of his impending fate. Thorne's eyes locked on Florence as they passed, recognition and hatred flashing across his face. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "I have friends who—" "That's enough." Ethan cut him off sharply, pushing him forward. "Your threats mean nothing now." They returned to Boys as a procession of justice, the marshals, their prisoners, and Florence riding tall despite her exhaustion. The news of Thorne's capture spread quickly, and by the time they reached the town, citizens had gathered to witness the arrival of the notorious outlaw. The sentencing was brief and to the point. The judge, having already overseen Thorne's trial in absentia, confirmed the jury's verdict and pronounced the sentence. Silas Thorne would hang in 1 week's time for the murder of Mayor Jenkins and his other crimes against the people of Idaho Territory. In the days that followed, Florence found herself at a crossroads. With Thorne captured and justice served, she was free to return to Wallace, to resume her teaching career, or to seek a new beginning elsewhere. The territorial governor himself had offered her a position at Boys's expanding school, impressed by her courage and composure throughout the ordeal. Ethan, too, faced decisions about his future. His vendetta against Thorne had been the driving force in his life for so long that its resolution left him somewhat adrift. Cooper had offered him a permanent position with the marshals in Boys, citing his exceptional work in bringing Thorne to justice. On the evening before Thorne's scheduled execution, Ethan found Florence sitting on a bench in the small garden behind the boarding house where she had been staying. The summer flowers were in full bloom, their sweet scent filling the air as twilight descended. "May I join you?" he asked, removing his hat as he approached. Florence smiled, patting the space beside her. "I was hoping you would." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Ethan spoke. "Have you decided about the governor's offer?" "I'm still considering it," Florence admitted. Boys is growing so quickly, and the opportunity to help shape its educational future is tempting. "But," Ethan prompted, sensing her hesitation. "But I came west seeking adventure and purpose," she said softly. "I'm not sure if settling into another school, even a fine one, is what I truly want right now." Ethan turned to face her more directly. "What do you want, Florence?" Her eyes met his, steady and clear. "I want to continue making a difference. And I've discovered that I'm stronger than I knew, more capable of facing challenges than I ever imagined." "You're extraordinary," Ethan agreed, his voice warm with admiration. "Few people, men or women, could have endured what you have with such courage." "It helps to have the right companion during trials," Florence said, her hand finding his on the bench between them. Ethan's fingers intertwined with hers, a simple gesture that conveyed volumes. "Cooper's offered me a permanent post here in Boys," he told her, leading a new division focused on bringing law to the more remote settlements. "Will you accept?" "I'm considering it," he echoed her earlier words with a small smile. "But like you, I'm wondering if there might be other possibilities." The unspoken question hung between them, charged with potential and hope. Florence's heart quickened as Ethan continued. "We've faced death together, traveled across half of Idaho Territory with killers on our trail. I've seen your strength, your compassion, your unwavering sense of justice." He paused, gathering his courage. "I know it's soon, perhaps too soon by proper standards, but I can't imagine facing whatever comes next without you by my side." Florence felt tears pricking at her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Are you proposing something, Marshal Archer?" "I'm proposing everything," Ethan said simply. "Marriage, partnership, a life together wherever our paths may lead us. I love you, Florence Ainsley, and I believe we could build something remarkable together." The declaration, spoken in the tranquil garden as fireflies began to dance around them, struck Florence as both utterly unexpected and completely inevitable. Their journey had forged a bond between them that transcended conventional courtship, creating a foundation of trust and mutual respect that many couples never achieved. "Yes," she whispered, her heart full to overflowing. "Yes to everything." Ethan's face lit with joy as he leaned forward to kiss her gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded in kind. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, the world seemed to have transformed around them, charged with new possibility. "I have one condition," Florence said, her eyes sparkling with mischief despite her serious tone. "Name it," Ethan replied, willing to agree to almost anything in that moment. "I don't want to be just a teacher or just a wife," she explained. "What we did bringing Thorne to justice, it mattered. It changed lives. I want to continue making that kind of difference." Ethan considered her words thoughtfully. "Cooper mentioned that the territorial governor is establishing a new program sending teachers to remote settlements, places too small or too isolated for proper schools. The teachers would need escorts, protection, someone who could enforce the law while they built foundations for learning. Traveling teachers with martial protection," Florence mused, warming to the idea immediately. "Bringing education and justice to the farthest reaches of the territory." "It would be dangerous at times," Ethan cautioned. "Uncomfortable, certainly. Far from the civilized life you knew in Boston." Florence laughed, the sound bright in the gathering dusk. "After what we've been through, I think I can handle a few rough trails and remote settlements." The next morning, they attended Thorne's execution together, a grim but necessary conclusion to their ordeal. The outlaw went to his death unrepentant, but his final moments held no power over them. His reign of terror had ended, and justice had been served. Afterward, they met with Cooper and the territorial governor, presenting their idea for the combined teaching and law enforcement initiative. To their delight, the governor embraced the concept enthusiastically, offering to fund a pilot program with Florence and Ethan as its first representatives. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Boyce's newly constructed church, with Cooper standing as Ethan's best man and Ruby, now employed respectably at a local hotel, serving as Florence's maid of honor. The governor himself attended, along with many of the marshals who had participated in Thorne's capture. Their honeymoon was unconventional, a journey to their first assignment, a mining settlement nestled high in the mountains where both education and law enforcement were sorely needed. Florence set up her schoolroom in an abandoned claim office, while Ethan established his marshal's post next door. By day, she taught the children of miners and trappers, instilling in them not just knowledge but the values of justice and citizenship that would help civilization take root in the wilderness. By night, she and Ethan planned for the settlement's future, working with the residents to build a community where law and learning could flourish side by side. Their work took them across Idaho territory over the next several years, from isolated mining camps to fledgling farming communities, always bringing the twin gifts of education and justice. The program expanded under their guidance, with other teacher marshal teams joining the effort. In 1882, Florence gave birth to their first child, a son they named James, after Ethan's fallen partner. 2 years later, their daughter Emily arrived, born during a snowstorm in a tiny settlement where Florence had been teaching for the winter. The children traveled with them, growing up with the vast Idaho landscape as their playground and classroom. Florence taught them alongside her other students, while Ethan showed them the ways of the wilderness and the importance of standing up for what was right. As the territory grew more settled, they eventually established a permanent home in Boise, where Ethan took on an administrative role with the Marshals and Florence founded a training college for frontier teachers. Their home became a gathering place for lawmen and educators alike, united in their mission to bring civilization to the wild places. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Florence and Ethan would sit on their porch and reminisce about that desperate flight from Wallace, marveling at the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. What had begun in violence and fear had transformed into a life of purpose and deep love, proving that even in the wildest parts of the frontier, justice and happiness could flourish together. And occasionally, when a new teacher would express doubts about venturing into the untamed territories, Florence would share her story of a schoolteacher who witnessed a murder, a marshal who protected her, and how together they had found not just justice but a love strong enough to tame the wilderness itself.